On stage, Adi Gaskell and the panel. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, James.
Pleasure. Thanks. Cheers. Well done, Rob.
Good stuff.
Well done. You all right?
Well?
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you, Charles.
So we're watching you on this.
We're living in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution, and it's bringing about a whole bunch of changes, both for employers and employees.
Yes,
and I think a lot of people are struggling to adapt with the pace and the breadth of that change. We've got four fascinating individuals with us this morning who can bring a lot of interesting perspectives from the coalface of dealing with that change. Now, I know earlier this year, Deloitte published their latest publication from Josh Bersin, and he was very much looking at the changing face of talent management in the workplace and the changing demands placed upon employers by technologies. And he was very much saying that talent management needs to take a more strategic place in organizational behaviors and leadership, because it is so important to adapting to the changing environment. Now, John, have you seen that with your interactions with workplaces? Is it becoming more strategic?
So yes, I do. I think the strategic agenda in organisations is caused by a huge amount of change in the workplace. Clearly, we see a globalised workforce. We see 4 generations in the workplace. We see the use of technology across the workplace having a major impact on talent. We also see, I think, pressure on L&D functions because there are very few staff per employee increasingly in L&D, so they have to respond using technology in that rather complex environment, and skills gaps that are growing. So the Employment Recruitment Federation, for example, is saying 46% of businesses are reporting skills gaps. And if we look at our own data in leadership and management, up to 500,000 new leaders and managers needed by 2020. So technology solutions clearly a key part of the agenda, I think, for L&D and for organisations, and it's all about driving strategic growth. It's all about cost efficiency as well. If we think about the costs of retention of staff, of upskilling, the more that we can identify existing talent in the organisation and develop that talent and upskill, the more rapid the strategic growth of an organisation, but also the reduction in costs is important to L&D in the organisation. So some interesting technologies, clearly some big ones, looking at talent management across the piece, but also I think in terms of that kind of talent assessment, some really interesting startups. Through our venture fund, we've invested in Empower the User in Dublin. Be interested in your view of this, but in the simulation space, being able to assess people's behaviour, I think, is incredibly important. You know, assessing knowledge and skill is perhaps a little bit easier, but assessing behaviour through simulation is very effective, and being able to do that at scale enables L&D to really make some important decisions that save them cost. And if we talk more locally, a massive impact on L&D locally is the apprenticeship levy. And, you know, being able to recruit and upskill apprentices in the UK is going to be incredibly important to L&D. And Get My First Job is an investment we made to look at that recruitment and placement of apprentices into organisations. Again, the German experience, fascinating on that. Lots to learn from there.
Yeah. Ulrich, you spent your entire professional life really at the vanguard of learning, technology and development. Have you seen a shift in how organisations are treating learning technology?
Yeah, we've seen a really big shift the last 5 years. So starting almost 25 years ago, looking at how professionals, in particular nurses and physicians, postgraduately had gaps and had made errors under pressure. We made a very long detour. It took like 15 years, going all the way back into middle school education, trying to understand how do we move on from the very fact-based, very like the enormous amount, the mountain of stuff we try to get into the heads of these people. Now we've come back to looking at what is the impact if we can apply these systems that can handle some of that complexity, so we can get back to looking at the more complex decision making, the attitude, the character skills, all these things, and we see a difference from when we talked to large corporations 6-7 years ago about this. There was primarily a check-the-box mentality. Let's just get these courses over. E-learning was something that was a necessary evil, to now being like, maybe technology could be part of actually driving real competences. And that shift is really happening really fast. We see a change from year to year, going to the same conferences, speaking to almost the same people. It's not the same persons, but it's the same job functions or management functions in the HR departments. Big, big change.
Well, Matthias, obviously you've created an education lab in Volkswagen. Is that an indication of the importance that VW placed on learning?
Exactly, yes. We created the Education Lab to experiment with new technologies because just right now we're within a big change within the automotive industry. We're going from building cars to enabling mobility. We have the change to electric mobility. We're working on self-driving cars. So there's a lot of and upskilling that has to be done within our company within the next few years. And we really see technology as a huge possibility to enable this change. And that's why we created the Education Lab, which is about experimenting with new technologies and really trying to focus on what helps within our company.
So what have you learned so far from your experiences?
Yes, we've learned that technology really is about educating many people at a large scale, much faster than we can do with traditional training. And what is really important, what I see also as a topic that we are talking about today, is how classic HR function and training and development is getting closer to each other. And I think that's a very important trend. You see some big examples of this, for example, when lynda.com has been acquired by LinkedIn, sorry, yes, thanks. And I think that's very important, and that's a big change, that classical HR functions and the training gets more linked together. We are working on one product right now, which is a platform that connects departments that have a certain need in skills and people who are willing to learn, so that we enable this big change within the automotive industry.
I mean, obviously there's an awful lot of technology coming into the workplace now, and AI and automation is a hot topic for everyone, whether employer or employee. There was an interesting study from earlier this year that said that just 17% of HR departments are actually equipped to manage a workplace that consists of both machine and human being. Paul, in amongst all of this rapid change, do you think organizations are coping with it particularly well?
I think it depends a little bit on the organization. I think there's certainly a growing understanding that this is something that companies need to be able to do. I find a lot of the HR folk that we talk to have a mixture of excitement and trepidation. So part of it is excitement, saying there are great things that we can do and we have great opportunities of spreading our reach and be closer to the business, but also trepidation, saying, am I really equipped to do this? We just launched recently in IMD a new program called Transform Tech, which is targeted at HR folks to help them get up to speed with technology. So these are like little mini digital boot camps where for 2 days they come together and literally they're writing code, they're creating apps, they're really getting hands-on with the technology. And part of that is a learning process, but part of that is a confidence-building process, just to be less scared of the notion of technology and seeing how can we use this technology in a smart way. And I think linked with that is a mindset, particularly maybe people who are coming towards the end of their career. I think there used to be a mindset it's saying, we'll just kind of ride this out for the last few years and see what happens. And I think those days have gone. You need to understand that right until 65 or 70 or 75 or whatever the new retirement age is going to be, you need to be on top of your game. You need to be up to speed with what's going on around you.
I mean, Matthias, I know IBM like the term augmented intelligence rather than artificial intelligence, and their opinion is very much that machines will be helping us do our jobs rather than necessarily replacing us. Is that the situation at VW?
That's what I'm seeing right now, yes. Right now the technology is not at the stage where it really takes away jobs. It is rather, it helps people facilitate their jobs. And that's what we're seeing right now, that AI-backed software is working hand in hand with people working in our departments.
And are you seeing a change in how people are being trained and the learning that they undertake in order to effectively work alongside the AIs and the machines that you're developing?
Yes, I think that's an important factor, that you educate people to work alongside with machines, not only in the production side, but also in the offices. And we see maybe a developing field in this area for the training department, which is that in future we will not only be educating people, but also educating or training machines, algorithms, and AIs. So this might be a new opportunity for the education sector to work and to explore a new field.
Ulrich, how are you seeing organizations adapting to this change?
So one of the interesting things that happened to us was that we've over the last year and a half spent the expertise we have in cognitive task analysis to build a completely new kind of products together with Cognizant, one of the large IT companies in the world, where we are interjecting a middle layer between legacy systems or support systems in call centers or other places to understand how the employees in a call center, how they actually work and interact with these systems. We also understand why they're making that decision making. So it does two things. It both augments their decision making. It's not AI. There are some AIs that qualify some of the data crunching under it, but that's not the point here. The point is that we help them have the information available so that they can make a human decision. What that also drives is it actually gives us some of that training data we need for the underlying algorithm. So if we over time were to use fewer medical coders to code medical diagnosis either for insurance or for research, understanding how they're making that human decision making now is actually critical to be able to train these systems, because it's one of the biggest illusions right now that deep learning or some of these other modern breakthroughs will just solve all the problems in front of us, because a lot of it is related to lack of training data, not for the humans, but for the algorithms. Which means that if we can use the same methods as we're using in education to understand the cognitive aspect of it, there are actually many similarities from that cognitive engineering we would do there to support humans to actually what we need to train the underlying algorithms over time. But what we also see, and this is where I'm much more optimistic than many of the predictions, is we see every time we do this, we actually manage to make the humans much more valuable than they were before, which means that we're at least postponing that wave of jobs being eliminated.
John, are you seeing a change in the kind of courses that you're offering to take account of the changing workplace and the different requirements of employees?
I think I'd say two things, Addy. I mean, firstly, we did some research last year on skills confidence, and there's a complacency, certainly in the UK, about the impact of AI and robots in the workplace, and HR's role, I think, to help educate the workforce as to how they're going to need to change is important. I'd echo this point about the importance of human skills on one level. So, you know, the importance of decision-making, problem-solving, team-working. These are more important skills than ever in that context. But equally, there is an impact, as you were saying, both on entry-level skills in engineering. There's actually a need for more engineers, certainly across the UK, I don't know if in Germany, to help maintain robots and support some, you know, there's almost too many engineers at the graduate level, but then, of course, very much advanced manufacturing skills are in short supply. So we've almost got, at the top and the bottom end, a need to create more volume to fill the skills gaps.
Yeah. It's interesting.
One final point I'd make, sorry, is on the soft skills, is being able to evidence what your soft non-cognitive skills are. Yeah. They're much harder to evidence. So we talked about assessment earlier on, but also providing evidence of those skills so the employer can find the people they need to do the jobs they need to do. We believe digital credentials are a strong part of that solution, but there's obviously a number of other ways of providing that evidence.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned HR and their role in all of this, because there was an interesting study by the University of Sheffield earlier this year that found that HR are amongst the slowest adopters of new technology. And the role that plays then in both understanding the skills that the modern employee needs, and certainly the high technology skills, but also understanding the ways that new technology can actually help them to learn the skills that they need. So Ulrich, you're obviously trying to sell pretty advanced technologies and solutions into organizations. Are you finding HR are up to speed with the kind of things that you're offering?
I think it's a very different world. Just within the last couple of years. Yesterday I spent most of the day with one of the largest retailers here in the UK. And because they know that if they don't change the way they benefit from the employee base they have today and that enormous amount of cost that goes into the people in their shops, they know that this is not something where changing nothing will just maintain status quo. They understand that they have to get a much more qualified human product, quote unquote, out of these people, which means that they're extremely eager to find ways to how do we systematically not only monitor and assess skills, but how do we also work with the employees to improve that? How do we see this as a coherent knowledge, skills, character? How do they build? But another thing that is also important is they also see this need that where does learning stop and where does search start? For the few of you who were in the other auditorium this morning with Esther's, where she says, we need to teach kids how to search. It's exactly the same thing we need to do in the corporate space. We need to build systems that are integrated between learning and knowledge retrieval. And that is those two dimensions of, they're both interested in more than just the ticking the box on the compliance training. And on the other dimension is what is actually learning and what is search. Those two aspects are super fascinating and they're new. It's within the last 3 or 4 years that has become on the agenda.
I mean, Matthias, with your education lab, is it almost a case that you're trying to train your HR department as well as you are trying to train the employees at Volkswagen?
Yes, I'll answer this question, but I will just catch up on your idea. There's a discussion, you said search and learning, and there's this discussion that learning should be not separated in seminar rooms, but going more to the workplaces. And I see this only as one step. I think that learning has to be integrated into everyday work. So just to add up, so search, learning, and working, and I think everything has to be connected to each other. And back to your question, the Education Lab is exactly about this. We want to build expertise in education technologies and technologies as a whole within the HR sector and especially within the training and development area of Volkswagen, because we think it's very critical that we understand the underlying techniques, the underlying business models, and that we really gain knowledge in how we can use technologies and not only buy some products and hope that the marketing department of these products are right, but that we really understand what's going on. So that's why we founded the Education Lab, to experiment with new technologies and try to find out and focus on what's working within our company and our company culture.
And Paul, in your experience, how are you seeing new digital learning technologies embedding themselves in the workplace? Is it a slow progress or?
Depends from company to company, but I do see, and this links with a couple of thoughts I've heard so far this morning, is there's a knowing-doing gap. So we've done a lot of research with thousands of business leaders who are saying now, I think in a survey, somewhere in the region of 65% of business leaders said the disruption that we're facing now has never been more intense. But when you looked at how prepared people were to deal with that, they felt on average they were about 15% prepared for what was going on. We've worked on skill areas that we think that people need to get up to speed on, what we call the haves and the have-nots, and the have, H-A-V-E. Humility, really important that people are prepared to say, yes, there are people who know more than me. Adaptability, so the willingness to say the decision I made yesterday was maybe the wrong decision. I've changed my mind. That shouldn't be something we should be scared of, but that should be something we're celebrating. V for vision, so I should have a long-term vision. Even if there's a lot of short-term uncertainty, I need to have a long-term vision. And E for engaging. Am I engaging other people? Do I have that curiosity? Am I engaged myself? I guess if people are here today, there's a good chance that you're engaged and curious because you want to know what's going on. And what we find is often that those are skills that are put forward as something that the workplace need to know, but they're not always modeled by HR. So I think if you're an HR person and you're in the room today, you also need to ask yourself the tough question, do I model those behaviors? Do I have HAVE? And if not, what can I do to develop those skills? And we find 3 other characteristics which underpinned agile leaders. One was hyper-awareness, so this ability to scan the environment and to keep scanning the environment, super important. informed decision making, so data-driven decision making. You mentioned decision making and problem solving earlier. Often decisions are made on the basis of a subjective whim, whereas now we have no excuse, the data is there, but is that data embedded into the decision making processes? And then finally, this ability for fast execution. Things don't need to be perfect, but things need to be quick. And that's important that we keep the balance between those. So I think I'm seeing a knowing-doing gap between what we know we need to do and what's being done, but sometimes a gap between HR and the business leaders. Is HR really modeling the behaviors they're trying to put forward?
I was having an interesting conversation with a technology company yesterday, and they were very much finding that their employees wanted to learn, but they felt they had to go through HR in order to learn. Do you feel there's a shift or a mindset change almost within workforces that HR need to facilitate our learning, but they don't need to actually provide it? It's almost as if they're providing a platform by which employees can self-develop. I mean, John, is that your experience?
that has to be the role of L&D, I think, supporting employees. We've talked about those pressures, it's about helping them learn how to learn, and also we talked about, being able to find what you need to learn at the point of need, and things are moving so fast. To have what you need when you need it is increasingly, I think, the role of L&D. So it's putting the learning in the hands of the learner, but providing them with the tools that help them to find what they need. So one example, and actually Mark's presenting on this later on, Filtered, a company, again, we invested in, have created what they consider the Spotify of learning. So it's trying to find, it's a learning recommendation engine that tries to provide you with just the nuggets of learning that you need absolutely when you need them on the job. As you say, it's all about applying that learning at the right time, but searching and finding exactly what you need when you need it. I think, the other aspect that's missing in HR perhaps a little bit, or L&D, is sort of data scientists, people who understand algorithms and data, because increasingly I think with learning analytics and talent analytics, you can understand a lot about the talent you've got, or the talent you don't have in your organization, and how to develop those. And so we see, again, great potential with learning analytics, with XAPI, organizations like HD2 and others doing great things with products like Learning Locker. So you can see how learning disengagement is happening, and when therefore to intervene with a face-to-face blended solution, or indeed when engagement is happening really actively, and therefore when you've got somebody who's really motivated and you can support more through their career progression. So I think that data layer and understanding how data is supporting you as a function in L&D is critical going forward.
I mean, Ulrich, I sense with Area 9 that this is very much what you try and provide, a curated environment where people can learn for themselves. I mean, are you seeing that the market's increasingly heading in that direction?
Yeah, so I think it's tempting to see these as environments where you learn yourself. I much more see them as a way to enable the learning environments that are otherwise there. So when you're with your either teachers or mentors or supervisors, those situations become more valuable, because it's a very important thing to look at our history. We came from building these personalized learning environments because we wanted to get more out of full-scale simulation with people in the room. Like we could see we were misusing these very expensive learning environments because we were dealing with too trivial things there. So all the things we've done the last 10, 15 years have actually just been to see if we can get more out of the high-value situations. But having said that, we've also done a lot of research and learned a lot about how do you actually benefit much more from those individualized learning environments and when you learn on your own. And I think one of the most important, maybe even revolutions we could be facing is, what if you in the future don't have a 3-letter degree? And that's what characterizes me. I have an MD after my title, but that's not what I'm doing, because I've put together a portfolio of competences that people actually recognizes me for. And I think that you don't have to be somebody who runs a company to look at yourself this way. I think a lot of employees will see themselves as a combination, a very individual set of much more smaller competences than 3-letter degrees. In my case, it's 2. But
I completely agree. It's about making those skills visible. It's about that collection of skills which aren't necessarily just the letters after your name that you've learned on the job, but also learned on your own through multiple media. Making those skills visible. Couldn't agree more. It's very important. And you know, people don't necessarily understand what those important skills are in L&D necessarily yet. They're starting to learn.
No, and the skills are often very concrete certifications or something you just have to get through, much more than I proactively decide that I want to add this to my toolbox. And my manager or my supervisor will appreciate that I've done this. So I think that is the biggest challenge for the L&D departments moving forward, is figuring out a system where, and a way to organize ourselves where you're both incentivized to do it, but you also you're both incentivized and rewarded, but you also understand why you're doing it. That's why this UK retailer, which is now on the cutting edge of actually trying to do something new, that's what they're trying to do, and that's what fascinates me about it.
I don't know whether you find this, and whether you find this in Volkswagen too, is the role of social learning. You know, L&D being able to facilitate the start of learning or a change program, but then actually having all of the peers, all the managers across the organization giving examples of how they've applied whatever it might be, performance management, for example, in their own context. So you're actually learning from each other much more socially rather than from the center. We see a significant movement there as well.
And we've had a question from the audience. Alessandra would like to know from Matthias, do you have any suggestions on how to integrate training and HR development from your experience?
I can share what we are doing right now, which catches up this question as well. We're building a platform that is about the relevance of learning. So because we have identified, we've spoken with many people working within Volkswagen to find out what are their problems. And it's really about, it's difficult to decide which are topics that are worth learning. And therefore we build a platform where departments can address their skill needs. People can see this and decide to move on and to develop by learning. So this is how we are trying to close this gap, to create relevance for learning and to develop the company in the direction they strategically, what the company strategically needs. So I don't know if this exactly answers the question, but maybe we can catch up during the sessions afterwards and talk about this.
Obviously, we're talking a lot about technology, and I know from the innovation space that there almost needs to be a sense that people have permission to innovate. The classic 20% time, giving people explicit permission to go off-piste and do things that they don't necessarily do in their day job. Just a quick snapshot from each of you. Do we almost need a 20% time for learning that gives people permission to go off and learn?
Well, it's fascinating on that one, Adi, because under the apprenticeship levy, you are required to comply with your funding to spend 20% as an apprentice of your time off the job. And employers are going to find that very difficult, and we're trying to talk through how that's going to work for them. If you're working on the shop floor in a retail environment, having 20% 1 day a week off the job is a challenge, but it's very important.
Yeah, yeah.
I would settle for 5%. In the corporate environment, even 5% would make a big, big difference. What we've seen with physicians is that if we spread out learning over time and maintenance of competences, it's a very limited amount of time you need to do. So in the US right now, it looks like we can maybe even get rid of the recertifications for physicians, simply because we can show that if you perform well in the training environment, we do a little bit at a time, you have a 98% correlation with passing your board exams. Then there's no reason to cramming for half a year every 7 years. I think there is a big, big impact of just a little bit, but spread out over a period of time.
Yeah, I'd say very much the same thing. I think we're in a world now where it's no longer the leader is the expert, but the leader is the facilitator. So the culture of your organization has to support that and has to enable that and has to allow that to happen. So that's super important. I think we're also in a world now where we're less focused on knowledge dissemination and we're more focused on learning application. So allowing people to have the opportunity to try things out without that becoming a drama is super important. But that needs to be supported. If you're going to change the culture in your organization, it has to start at the top. So, and we have to make sure that we don't have double standards. So we don't have people at the top having key performance management, key success factors, indicators, which go against that desire for experimentation. If those aren't aligned, we're in trouble. And then the middle management role needs to absolutely reinforce that and back that up. And often it's a disconnect between top management and middle management. At least in my experience, that's often where it falls down.
Matthias, a quick final word from you.
My personal opinion is there shouldn't be a quota of 20% time that you separate again learning from working. I think learning should be part of the working, so that, if, for example, if you do a mistake, then you use this and learn from this, and next time you don't do this mistake again. So I'm not for separating and building quotas. I'd rather put these things together and integrate the learning into the working ideas and into the goals of the working.
Super. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. It's been a fascinating half an hour. Hopefully everyone's looking a little bit more optimistically at the change that we're facing now and the education that we will need to do to adapt to that change. I know there were one or two questions that we didn't get around to. I'm sure the gentlemen will be available over a coffee, which we're heading to now. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Eddie.